Gina, for joining. Really excited to have you. So, founders know how today's conversation episode is going to play out. Gina and I are going to have a chat around, all things Duolingo, growth, marketing, tactics, anything that helps those founders and you guys go from the 0 to 1. Hopefully it's going to be a lot of fun. And if you have any questions throughout the episode, you can just put them in the chat below and I can monitor them throughout the conversation and pitch them to Gina for you. So why do we get going? Gina, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. And I actually have a fun fact to share when we start.
Oh, wow. Should we hear it? Let's hear it.
Yeah, my fun fact is that I actually applied and got into Antler 3 years ago. I just never did you know that? I actually never actually had the opportunity to join.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
In Berlin. So I'm a big fan and of course love finding anything I can to help founders. And before we start also, Ollie, as I shared with you before, for the founders who are here, I'm an open book, which also means that if I don't know answers, I will just say, I don't know. And I don't know a lot of things, but I do know a lot of things as well. And I'm excited to share them with you.
Awesome. Well, hey, love to hear about your story. Where did it all begin? I read you started working on the farm. So what led you from working on the farm to going to Duolingo?
So when I read that question, I came up with a bunch of really funny answers that I was going to give you, but I won't do that because it just doesn't feel appropriate. But I didn't actually work on a farm. I wanted to. And so when in terms of my story, and I'm happy to double click on that anytime, but we'll whisk through right now in the interest of the audience. A lot didn't work out for me early in my career. Things were really not looking great. I got a job, I got fired. I got another job, I got laid off. I lost my visa in the US multiple times, had to go back to Brazil. And at one point I'm a philosophy major and I tend to, be a little existential. And I had just had a moment of I never wanted to do this whole career thing. Climbing a ladder seems really fruitless. And I would like to just, live on farms and live a simple life. So I bought a ticket to go around the world and signed up for WOOF, which is the World Organization of Organic Farms. And I was going to go live on farm where basically you work and they let you stay there. And that was my life plan at the age of 24. But then I ended up having this opportunity to work with Tumblr, which I actually tried to say no to. And they convinced me on the basis of, you probably need some money if you're going to go live in different countries on farms. So why don't you work with us for a couple of months and then you can go. But things ended up working out so well and they liked me so much and we grew. And I realized that was a sort of a big career opportunity that it would be silly to pass up on. So I never actually went to live on farms. I just went straight back to work.
And here you are today. When did the Duolingo opportunity come about?
The Duolingo opportunity came about 1.5 years after that. So I started helping Tumblr grow in Brazil. Then that worked. So they asked me to help them grow in Chile and Argentina. I had no business doing any of that. I didn't have experience helping tech companies. I didn't have experience with growth, but I'm a hustler and you just, and some of these things are, I don't know if they're intuitive to me. How do you get something in front of a lot of people in the cheapest way possible and the most effective way possible? So I started a little company that was a consulting company to help tech startups and tech companies in the US understand how to enter and grow in Latin American markets. And Duolingo was one of my first clients. So that was they contacted me end of 2012. I started early 2013 and then consulted for them and ended up going on full time. I think it was probably July or August of that year.
Really cool. What I love about the story, and for those founders who don't know, you helped basically take the platform from a couple million users to hundreds of millions of users, right? So we'd love to dive into, some of the tactics and early day 0 to growth strategies you guys use to really, onboard users and take the platform to new heights. Love to find out though, what were the early days of Duolingo and what was it? How did you first of all find out building? How did you first start onboarding? The first couple million users all the way up to where it is today.
So Duolingo, the way it got to the first couple of million users, which is when I started, there were 3 million users there, which is no small feat. Was that, and this is almost like a little bit of a cheat, which is the founder, Luis Vanon, had created CAPTCHA, CAPTCHA and reCAPTCHA sold to companies to Google. Gave a TED talk. In the TED talk, he said, working on this thing, and anyone who wants to be a beta user can sign up here. So even when Duolingo just first launched, there were a lot of people who signed up for the beta, and it started growing from there. But when I came along, I was basically trying to do whatever had worked with Tumblr, which was, you know what, I'm going to try to get Duolingo in front of as many people as possible for free. And PR became a huge vehicle. I didn't know it was PR. I just thought it was trying to cold message people who I thought could like make a splash for us, and who people who fit into that category were often journalists, because they had a platform for which, you know, they could reach thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people at once. And if I could tell them a compelling story, then they might be, you know, interested in writing about it. I had no contacts with journalists at the time. I was 25. And I was just messaging people I was 25. I was just messaging people on LinkedIn and Twitter. And then also things that would allow us to build credibility and trust that would then allow us to get PR. I didn't understand these frameworks back then. I was really just throwing things against the wall that made sense. Now looking back, I understand that's what I was doing. But for example, in addition to journalists trying to get Duolingo featured, or the founder to speak at organizations that were very credible, like top universities around the world, anything related to the government, anything related to like well-known technology companies, that gave it a credibility that it didn't really have. And then on the side of Duolingo, which is the least sexy part about the growth of Duolingo, is that it was a very engineering-driven company, and they just really focused on building a great product, and they were obsessed. What did it mean to build a great product? They actually didn't listen to users. So, you know, now I work with founders, much like Antler, and we, of course, listen to your users in the earliest days is the most important thing. We didn't listen to users at all. We just kind of did what we thought was the right thing to do. But the fact that the product was good and it was minimally retentive allowed me to come in and really blow up the acquisition side of it, even if it was free acquisition, such that when people came and tried Duolingo, they wouldn't just immediately leave because it sucked.
Super cool. There are two questions there which we should focus on. One, when you were reaching out to journalists, what was the pitch?
That evolved over time. So that's I think fun to point out, because you write a pitch and you're like, this is it. And then you go and you pitch someone and they're not interested. And it's very disappointing, you know, but like what we ended up doing over time was every time meaning me and the co-founder and CEO of Duolingo, because I was with him a lot in these sort of like opportunities to speak, whenever we spoke to journalists or people of influence and we started telling them about Duolingo and we saw their eyes light up, or we saw them ask a question about something, we were like, that's interesting. And so then we would prioritize it in the next pitch, you know, and you start constructing it with these pieces. And I guess you can call them signifiers, whatever the things that like to people mean something. It can be numbers that are impressive, or it could be facts. So in terms of the Duolingo pitch in general, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it as flawlessly now because I left in early 2018. That feels like ages ago. But we would always start with something that was like, did you know that 1.2 billion people in the world are trying to learn languages? And of those people, 800 million of them are trying to learn English to improve their life opportunities. People go like, no, I had no idea. Wow. Yeah. So the irony of that is that 2/3, or the vast majority of people trying to learn a language around the world, are doing so because they want to learn English so that they can get a better job. But unfortunately, learning English requires having money or status, or being in a first world country in most cases. And otherwise, you just don't get access to great English education, which means you won't learn it. Like, for example, in Brazil, most people study English growing up, but nobody speaks English. It's 3% of the population at best. So the irony is you need money to learn the thing that's going to get you more money. That's already like, you know, immediately interesting to people. And so then we would talk about, and then two, the problem. So that's the problem. Like, why is now the time to do something about it? You know, like we never had access to hundreds of millions of data points. Now we actually can observe people as they learn. It just wasn't possible. Like a teacher would have to like come up with something new every semester and then tell her friend about it. Now we can actually look at how hundreds of millions of people are learning. We can learn from that and we can iterate, which means learning has never been a science base. The second problem with learning a language is it takes forever. So you need to stay engaged. Unless you have a teacher or mom telling you to do it and forcing it down your throat, you need a way to stay engaged. And that's why making it fun is revolutionary. We talk about that. So like effective, fun. And then third, it's expensive. So we made it free. So you like outline the story, but of course you can't do that in a pitch to a journalist. There, you need to get to the words and the numbers that are going to make their eyes pop as quickly as possible, because you might just have one sentence to do that, or 140 characters or whatever. Or on LinkedIn, you know, when you send someone an invite, you can sometimes send a message, but it's a very short message. You need to, in that message, include enough things that the person will want to respond to you. That's the goal. You want them to respond. So coming up with like whatever sounded impressive. You can't tell this whole story. When we workshop this at Latitude with founders, we try to identify what are those words. And it could be like, you went to an impressive school as a founder, or you worked for an impressive person, or someone impressive used your thing, or it's a number that like of people that have downloaded your thing. Things that like make that journalist think, okay, this seems more important than I would have expected. I've never heard of it, so I need to find out more. And that just got, you know, iterated on over time. For people who are starting this out, I recommend writing something out, running it past your family and friends, and then starting to pitch unimportant journalists. Like not your don't go to the New York Times and send that message. Send a message to like journalists or influencers or people who you would be okay getting a no from, or hearing nothing back from. And then based on their response, iterate, send it to more people. You can even be systematic and do like 10 people, then 10 people, then, you know, with a new version. By the time you get to the pitches that really matter to you, you already have a sense of something that's going to actually drive a response.
Super cool. I actually back in the day when I started my first company, I was one of those kids, you know, you start your first company at age 13, you're trying to get all the media. Anyway, I think I reached out to like
The bracelets.
yeah.
I read about that.
Remember? Yeah. Oh, you read about it. Oh, dear. But you know, you're hustling in the early days, and I think what's so amazing is people are always willing to chat, right? But if you can pick the right journalist, then fantastic. But you have to get the story right. And I think in the first sentence, I remember now, I said I was 13, right? So in the first sentence, I said I'm 13, just would love to chat. It's a bit random, a journalist receiving an email from a 13-year-old, right? So I think just be creative, right? But let's maybe jump to the fun aspect, which you mentioned about the product, which I absolutely love. So I tried out Duolingo last night, absolutely love the product. What do you think, what makes it so engaging that people want to keep coming back? And the reason why I ask this is we see so many of these consumer social apps come up, they kind of come and go, they have massive hype for 6 months, then they die. Why is Duolingo still around?
There's so many ways to answer this question. And of course, I don't think I like it's such a big question, and like in our ages that we might be able to look back historically, understand things much more. But I would say, look, there's some themes that we can identify. And then there's a less sexy, but also much more interesting to me answer, which is the machine that Duolingo built on data, just like the ability to, and I know, you know, Antler entrepreneurs are super early stage, same with Latitude. So the hard thing about talking about growth is that when you're so early, you need to get like a minimum amount of users and a minimum amount of retention, so that like running A/B tests is even statistically significant, and you can actually like do that in a methodical, ongoing way. But Duolingo built just that. It was like an A/B testing machine. And not A/B testing like let's just like test everything, because there was also an element of like design and lovability to it that was core. So I would say A/B testing in science, love of the experience and design, and the mission to bring free language education to the world. Those three elements I think make Duolingo super special. So also let's go back to the original factor, which is that it actually solves a real problem that's experienced by hundreds of millions of people in a very acute way. So people experience the problem of not knowing English, and that can actually take their families out of poverty. But then outside of that, there's people who want to speak another language because they want to live in a new country, or they met someone that they want to connect with, or whatever. It's a real problem, and people are actually trying to learn a language in so many different ways right now and failing. Versus a lot of the consumer social apps we see come out, they're like, you could outline a problem like, oh, it's like they make it even more fun to connect with other people, but it doesn't like solve maybe the problem of like we need deep connection and we're feeling as lonely as ever, and it's not solving the problem. So that's a problem, and the solution that comes up is like very sort of like light, and then it's kind of cool for a while and it dies out. I think that's like you can't like overstate that. It's a real problem. Two, the testing and the science, like everything at Duolingo was an A/B test. So anything we wanted to roll out, someone would be like, is this an A/B test? Because like, it was like, we couldn't roll anything out unless it was, which meant that whenever someone tried to copy Duolingo, which happened regularly, even like our competitors early on were like, would just literally like copy something we had made and paste, like with the same font and the same colors, you know, but they didn't have the data that we had that allowed us to understand why we got there. And that's incredible. And that I like to talk about this because I've met a lot of early stage founders, especially in Latin America, but I would just generalize, maybe probably say in general, who for a good reason outsource the code in the early days. They go, you know what, I have an amazing idea. I have a consulting background. I don't know how to code. I'm going to hire a dev shop and they're going to build this first version of it for me. And then we're going to like iterate. Maybe with no code and AI, we're like now, like what I'm about to say is going to become irrelevant in a couple of years, but I'm not sure. And it's not irrelevant today, which is even if you get someone to build the code, if you don't have people in-house who actually understand what's being built and learn from the data that's coming in to understand why and how you got to the next phase, it's like you got the right answer in the math equation, but you got the whole equation wrong on the test because you copied your friend. It means you didn't learn any math, and that as soon as you get another equation, you're going to get it wrong. It's very short-lived. So really having serious scientists and mathematicians on staff, like people who were real computer scientists, was crucial because we couldn't get away with running A/B tests that, you know, that were irrelevant or that were driving us in the wrong direction. We knew that when we move forward, it was real moving forward. And so it's really hard to say like Duolingo is going to become irrelevant unless something crazy happens. And like with AI right now, I don't know, even though I believe that like from what I've seen, that team will figure out how to incorporate AI because of the systematic approach to how they do everything. That's one. The second thing I think is this like likability, like love for design aspect, which is easy to lose if you're A/B testing everything. Because once you're just looking at data, then, you know, maybe it's, you know, I was actually, I was reading a book today about like evolution that makes me think about that and how like we self-select, like how evolution happens. And we think that like evolution happens in a way that like our genes are like self-selecting for like the betterment of our species, and that every change that happens is like for the better because we're evolving, and it's actually not true. And it's just the same for A/B testing. You can get a result that actually yields like an improvement in whatever metric you're trying to look at. But if you don't stay focused on like what the experience is and have someone who actually like has a love for like what is design? Design is just like pleasantness. It's beauty. It's like enjoyability. Of course, it can be much more than that. It can be usefulness, etc. if you're going to UX, but let's just talk about like colors and, you know, a pretty owl, or if the owl like flies across the screen and like flutters like that may actually not even have an impact on your retention numbers. It may, but if you can somehow know that this is actually improving like just the joy of using this product, that matters in the long term. Is really hard to prioritize when you're in the early days. But losing that completely and just having engineers work on something creates something that's going to be really heavy and unenjoyable. And even if you're seeing at some point, the scale is going to tip. So I think that's an intangible thing that is important to Duolingo and that remains true today. And that matters. And it's something about like connecting and emotions and beauty and love and life that's hard to measure. And the third piece is the mission, which is that Duolingo was built to bring free language education to the world because you can improve people's lives significantly. And that has always been so important to the growth of the company, not just because we want to help the world improve, but because, one, when you're a startup, it's really hard to hire the best talent in the world because you can't afford it, because you just can't prove that you're building something that's like meaningful. But if you have an incredible mission that people can actually believe in, they're much more likely to come and work with you. And we had the added factor that we were in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's not a sexy location to go work for if you are a top engineer in Silicon Valley, or if you graduate at the top of your class. So that allowed us to bring in incredible talent. So of course, we can talk about talent, like, and how we hired as like one whole thing, but like that. And then secondly, it also forced us to make really tough decisions that prioritize the long term over the short term. Like, for example, when we started hiring people to look at like revenue or to look at learning, or to look at growth, people wanted to optimize for their metrics. But every time someone was doing something that would improve a metric, but actually hurt the mission, like now it's actually getting in the way of people who have no money to learn a language, we wouldn't let it go past, and we'd have to find really creative ways to go around it. And that allowed us to talk about Duolingo in a way that was really special, to get people to rally around it, to get people to subscribe to Duolingo, because we added a thing on the screen that said, hey, if you pay for this, you're actually helping people learn for free. Like, people believe in this, that's our user. So now, like, so I think that aspect has also a long-term effect that's hard to explain in, as specifically as when you're talking about growth experiments.
Yeah, I'm loving this. We've got quite a few founders here today, like you said, who are still super early, are still doing the A/B testing. What was some of the A/B testing which worked really well for you at Duolingo, which caught you by surprise? I think like the badge system, you didn't think the badge system was going to work, right? And then it did.
Yes. So I will definitely talk about the badges, because I think that's a super interesting one. I'll start with the really less sexy stuff, which is like, one thing, when I first started doing this, it was just being a backend engineer. And so that meant we didn't have a designer to design new screens. Like, we couldn't really do all that much. And we were told, like, here's a bunch of ideas that the companies had that like are potential A/B tests, like look at them, prioritize them, see what you guys want to do. And we wanted to work on notifications, but that wasn't on the list because the team had already worked on notifications and it had already been optimized. But that yielded great results. Like, I won't go into super specifics, but working on even more yielded great results. And I think that was surprising, even though obviously, like, oh, obviously notifications, like, no, the lesson there for me is that, like, when you're looking at A/B testing, you need to look at the number of people that you're impacting. And like, if you're able to improve that metric by X%, then how many, like, what does that do to the metric you're trying to impact? And for us, it was always day one retention. And if you're working on notifications, it's probably the biggest part of the funnel outside of people who are like, have yet to discover Duolingo or like downloads. Like, notifications is very high up in the funnel in terms of the user experience from someone. So there are a lot more people receiving Duolingo notifications than there are people who are like doing the second lesson of Duolingo, for example, because anyone who just signed up and never did a lesson is getting a notification because they signed up. So because this is a very large number of people and it impacts people on a daily basis, if you're able to improve that metric by a small percentage, you can actually impact day one in a meaningful way. And I think that looking at that ROI aspect of every single experiment idea is super important in prioritization, which is one of the hardest things when you're thinking about growth. I know this question is coming up later, maybe.
Yeah.
What are the hardest things? But in terms of the badges, I think that was surprising for so many reasons. Like, first of all, because everyone thought that badges was going to work. So the funny thing is, like, everyone thought badges was going to work and it worked. So like, Gina, what's surprising about that? Like, it sounds pretty straightforward. No, like, everyone thought badges was going to work because the way that we thought about growth and retention and Duolingo in general wasn't like, okay, how do we become the most retentive education app? We just thought, how can we become the most retentive app? Education apps are actually terrible at retention. People, like, we've seen, like, not just apps, but like, Udemy and like all of those, like Coursera at the time, like, so many people sign up, like, I want to do a Harvard course. And then you look at like retention, it was abysmal because you don't have a mom or a teacher telling you to do it. Like, it's really hard to get people to keep coming back every day. So we wanted to look at apps that we thought had incredible retention, and that was games. So as a team, we played games on a regular basis at Duolingo, and we always talked about our favorite games. This was still like Candy Crush times and like, Angry Birds and whatnot, in the early days. And we try to identify things that we thought could work on Duolingo that came from a game, but that was probably like a lever for retention. And badges was in every game at that point. Like, of course, it was huge on Foursquare back in the day, but then like every single game had some sort of badges. And so the team was just dying to try it out. But when we looked at this ROI sort of prioritization thing that I just talked about, it was really hard to prioritize badges because the fun thing about notifications is that it's like really simple to implement. You don't need design. You just need someone who can write a line of copy. That's it. It's super fast and easy. And I could do that. So we didn't need anyone else. And it was like 2 lines of code and it was done. To do badges, something like that, it's a whole experience. Like, you can't just do like, here, like, I designed a badge, I gave it to someone, see if that improved our growth. No, now you need to design a system of badges. When do people get badges? What are the badges for? Where are they going to live in the app? Like, we really avoided having like stuff in the hamburger menu or like too much going on the screen. It was super simple. Like, user experience had to be very straightforward. So we couldn't just add more things. It had to, like, we had to find out where this was going to live. How did it make sense with the whole experience? when someone got like a badge, would it get displayed, and how, like, what was the relationship between the badges? There's just so many things to think about that we would, like, if we rank that in terms of investment in the ROI framework, then it was super high. It was always the highest investment, even if we thought it was going to be high returns. So in the early days, when the team insisted, I was like, fine, can we do something that actually reduces the investment aspect of it so that we can test it out? And in order to do that, like, why don't we come up with like which we did with many experiments, like, what's the minimum viable product version of this experiment, like MVP experiment? So, which, maybe is a good idea. In this particular case, ended up being a terrible idea, because what we came up with was, okay, we'll design one badge, and it's going to be like in the format of like a girl celebrating, and like you get this thing and it says you got your first badge, and we put it like, we wanted to put it really early in the experience so that we could like immediately get a lot of users to check it out, so that we could have statistical significance very quickly. So we put it right after signing up. So like you sign up and you're like, whoa, congrats, this is your first badge, and introduces you to badges. We did that, and it was fairly easy, although it took longer than, like, for example, notifications, because it required design. And I think that the designer decided to put in like an animation in there. And if the designer does that, now it takes way longer to code. And I wasn't, I think, seasoned enough to like catch, whatever, as a PM to catch that. So we did that, and it yielded no results. And so as a team, we were like, look, guys, we tried, and badges isn't high ROI right now. And it was like almost a year until, I don't know when exactly, but we just realized that we weren't dog fooding our experiments, which meant that we would like come up with these experiments, we would test them, we would look at the results, we would write it up, we would launch. But never did we like design experiments and then sit at a table as a team and then go through it and actually experience it and then speak up about what that experience was like. And if we had done that, we would have noticed that signing up and getting a badge is extremely lame, and that like the girl with the balloon didn't mean anything. You didn't even have anywhere to like put the badge, so you couldn't even show it off. Like, it wasn't a collection. Like, it was a dumb MVP in a way, because it wasn't really viable. It was just minimal. So then we decided to like, okay, we're going to take time to really go through with this. We designed like a much more robust experiment. It ended up being very successful. And then we built on that. So that was one of our, like, in a way, like, favorite things, like, find something that's working. Okay, what else can we do? What else can we do? What else can we do? And like, let's like squeeze all the juice we can out of this. And so it ended up being the most successful experiment in the company at the time, in terms of like, it brought in revenue, because we launched the badge that was like, buy your first item in the store with real money. And people did it just to get the badge, It brought in new users because we said, refer your friends and then get a badge. So people referred their friends. Like, we created something that people wanted, that didn't cost us any money. That actually helped impact not just the growth day one metric that we were looking at impacting, but a lot more. And yeah, now I haven't used Duolingo in a long time, I will admit. I just needed a break. But I know that badges became an even bigger part, and I don't know where we are today, but that's kind of how that evolved.
Yeah, I'm loving this. Well, Duolingo is a free product, right? In most cases. So we'd love to find out, back in the day, how did you strike the balance between providing value to the free users and converting them into paying customers? I think it's always the hardest part of consumer social products. You have the majority of them free of charge, but then a small proportion of them is trying to convert them into paid users.
Yeah. And it's super, super tough. And like, and Ollie and everyone who's here, like I was telling Ollie just before we started, at Duolingo, we had a privilege, but maybe it's not right to call it a privilege, because I think there are many companies that end up being in this situation when you raise a good amount of venture capital and you're not like under gunpoint from investors to monetize immediately. We had the quote unquote luxury to basically figure out how we're going to take over the market first and then monetize. So during the majority of my tenure at Duolingo, we weren't charging users. So my knowledge there is going to be limited. So there was an additional difficulty for Duolingo because of this mission aspect that I pointed out, which I think was really great in the long term, but in the short term was tough, which was that we couldn't do the most simple things that every other app was doing to monetize, and also the love for design. I'll talk about these two things as like the two really great secrets of Duolingo and how hard they made our work, which is like, it's always a double-edged sword. So this mission aspect of it meant that we couldn't just be like, you know what, we have, let's say when I first joined, like we had 3 million users. Maybe like at the time we're having this conversation, we're already at like 20 million users. Let's just chart, and this is not daily active users, right? This is total users. So, but still, that means that we have like, let's say more than 1 million daily actives. We charge $1 from each of our users, and there we have $1 million in revenue, right? Like that's it. A $1 subscription, it's nothing. Like it's so cheap. Make it $5. You know what? Maybe like in less developed countries, we make it cheaper. Like we can make this fair. But our mission was to bring free language education to the world, and we're well aware that a very large part of the population isn't banked and isn't even going to have a card, so they can't buy anything. So if you make it 1 cent, it doesn't matter. You still have to have a way to provide that 1 cent. And now Duolingo is no longer accessible to you. So, okay, so that's off the table. All right. Well, you know what? Why don't we let people learn stuff on Duolingo, and we can let them get to a certain amount of learning. And then if they want to proceed, then they have to pay. That's fair. That's what most apps do. It's called the freemium model. Same. We're like, no, like our whole mission is to allow someone who didn't have access to English learning to actually get to a point where they can potentially get a new job, or, improve their lives in a meaningful way, not just get a taste for this and not being able to afford it. So that was also off the table. So that made it super hard in the early days to even think about monetization. And I'll tell you about how we were thinking about monetization and why we thought we could keep going without charging users a subscription for many years. And the second thing was this design element of it, which was we were very purist as an organization, and we didn't want to have ads because ads make the experience not great. I tend to swear a lot, so I have to watch myself. To make the experience, huh?
It's so annoying. Actually, if I have adverts on apps now, I delete the app. Just
exactly. So it's really annoying. It just gets in the way of this amazingly pleasant, lovable experience that we're building. And we also knew that there were apps and companies, maybe Spotify at the time was one that we talked, like we looked up the Spotify a lot in terms of subscription, but we knew that there were companies, not just Spotify, there was especially like language learning apps that would make ads so unbearable that you would then subscribe. Just stop. Like I'll pay for it, And so then we're making the experience just like unbearable. So we're like, we're not going to do ads. Early days, like meaning like the first 3 to 4 years, we came up with a bunch of monetization ideas that we thought were going to work. The first one was the whole premise of Duolingo was learn a language, translate the web. If you look at like Duolingo history, that's where we started. That was our tagline. I will also say that really helped me with PR because it sounded like a really cool concept. Which was like that while you're learning, the whole idea behind it was that while you're learning a language, you're doing a lot of work that is translation work. Like, what is cat, gato? What is this? That's like, so you translate set lines and that work gets thrown out in the trash because it's just some part of your learning. But what if we actually use this work and make it so that like it actually applies towards translating things that are not translated in the world and make it accessible to far more people? So if you don't know English, for example, you can't access most of the internet, which means you can't read most of the articles that are on there. You can't watch most of the videos that are on there. So like you're already impaired. What if we can get all of this work that's being done by students around the world and use this? And then while you're learning, you can also be translating something. So like it's a win-win. That was a lot of the thinking behind Duolingo, which is similar to CAPTCHA, reCAPTCHA, because Luis was the founder of that. So that came from him. And we really believed that we could sell translations to large organizations and monetize that way. And we did. We actually sold translations to BuzzFeed and CNN. And I was there. So when BuzzFeed launched in Brazil and Chile, and I helped them with that because we were translating their content for them with users. So users were learning languages. We were taking that. We were like basically like figuring out like which ones were the most likely to be correct. Kind of like in a CAPTCHA, reCAPTCHA way. I don't know like how much this audience will know about that, but like the way that reCAPTCHA works is like you can translate something or you can actually transcribe something that the internet like hasn't been transcribed before, and the computer knows that if like 15 people transcribe something as cat, that word is probably cat, especially if those 15 people have also transcribed another word that it knew what it was, and it was dog, and they all got it right. So the likelihood of cat being right is very high. So we were applying that model to translations. We sold it to BuzzFeed and CNN, and we're like, okay, we're doing this. Turns out that translations is not a good business. Please help me find a synonym for the word SHITTY that I'm not coming up with right now, but not good is what I'm using. Translation is not a good business because it's super annoying on a lot of fronts. First of all, you're competing with other translators for like a cent difference on words. It's like, we'll translate things for 4 cents a word, no 5 cents a word, no 3 cents a word, no 5. It's like this. And then also it's very relative. So for example, Spanish, we translate something and then 10 people would be like, that's the wrong translation, because across Latin America, there's like slight variations, and like it's hard to say this is the perfect translation. So it's very easy for clients to be like frustrated because the person there doesn't think that this is the best word. Long story short, it was going to be really tough to scale. And we started realizing that we were putting more and more resources towards perfecting this translations business because that's where our money was coming from. And that was very disconnected from the core of our mission, which was to bring free language education to the world. So now we're building a translations business to support this like NGO kind of thing. And we knew that our investors, who were VCs, were going to be like, why are you not staffing this up more and just stopping this whole like nonsense thing that you're doing over here? This is a translations business, it's brilliant. And like we would all lose our motivation and leave. So we were like, okay, we still have runway. Let's cut this out and try other things. So that's like OG. Then we're like, okay, you know what? Like another big barrier for learning a language is that you need to take a test called the TOEFL to prove that you speak English, or the IELTS if you're in the UK, and there's like different ones. I think I forget the names now in Japan and China, but they're these standardized tests and they're kind of a monopoly. There's only one of them. They're expensive and hard to book. So people like, for example, you can like magically learn English just through watching TV and reading books or whatever, and you like worked your way up there and you learned English and you didn't have any money, and now you need $250 to book the TOEFL and you don't have it. And then worse, even like if you live in a small country, you try to book, they only have certain dates, maybe that like the date you need is booked, so now you need to travel, or you're going to lose the date and then you don't get to apply to school. Like, so there's all of these barriers in the way of someone who's just trying to improve their life. So we decided to build our own test. Today is known as the Duolingo English test, but that was going to be our long-term monetization strategy. Like we think we can make a lot of money from testing. We think we can make midterm money from like translations, and like short-term we're okay because we have some venture capital. Anyway, the tests took a really long time. So we did come to a point where we were like, we need to figure something out more in the short term. And so we started testing with ads. But of course, as idealists, we were like, we're gonna not sell like Google ads. We're gonna actually pitch custom ads to big, look like cool brands, and we're going to design Duolingo ads that fit with the beautiful experience that we have. But of course that was really hard to scale, and like we had a lot of trouble with that. I don't know if it could have been executed better, but we kind of gave up. And at the same time we were testing with Google ads and they were bringing in revenue. It wasn't like a lot of revenue, but it was a good amount to like, see that we were at the point where the investors were like, okay, hello, like, where's the money? Like, you guys have a lot of users, what's going on? And then of course we knew that we had to launch subscriptions too, but we had to make it in a way that didn't get in the way of like the poor users from like learning. And we also didn't want to make ads so bad that you'd want to subscribe. So what else do we lump in there? And then we had all of these tough discussions because like as a growth leader, we like our team would come up with something amazing. Like, for example, the Duolingo streak. Like the concept of the streak is something I think pretty well known probably for everyone here. Like if you do something for one day, you have a streak of 1. If you do it again the next day, you have a streak of 2. If you do it again the third day, 3. If you don't do it the fourth day, you go to 0. And then you have to start again. That was super motivating to users. It tends to motivate humans to do anything. So we knew that most of our users who lost their streak didn't come back. That was like the main reason for churn, because they just give up. And most people lost their streak on the weekends because they were just off of their normal routine. And we made it so that Duolingo was like a very important part of your daily routine, like brushing your teeth. So we decided to give users like a pass and be like, okay, like if you can protect yourself with a streak freeze on Fridays, or you can like buy a streak freeze in advance. And then if you don't use it over the weekend specifically, like you don't lose your streak when you come back on Monday. So we started testing things like that. Like, how do you help the user keep their streak? But then we got into these big arguments because the head of learning, she's still there today, Gina Gotthilf, she's awesome, was like, you are telling people to cheat. This doesn't make sense. Like, you're actually helping people self-sabotage. Like, they're just trying to learn. And I would be like, I don't care, because if people don't retain, if they don't come back on Monday, they're not going to learn a language. So I'm actually helping their learning. And she's like, no, you're helping them cheat, and that's bad for learning. And then the monetization team would come and be like, sounds like you found something that people want. We're going to charge for it. And I'd be like, no, this is going to help our growth and it helps our users. And then monetization people would be like, we're not an NGO. Like, we need to charge for something. So we had these very animated discussions around these 3 pillars that I think really helped keep us grounded, such that with Duolingo didn't make easy choices. Like, for example, charging every user, Like we couldn't just do that. Or making it super easy. Like if we make Duolingo super, super, super easy, people retain more because they give up when it's hard, or they, like they can't pass. So, but then that doesn't actually help them learn, or and so on and so forth. So there were things that we could do that were like shortcuts that were sort of barred by having these three pillars talk to each other.
Yeah. There are so many interesting insights, and I think we can talk forever about this, but I think it's a good time to talk about talent. There are two things here. We have an operators network of about 400 operators who are heads of growth, heads of product, who come from the best tech companies globally. We have quite a few founders here today who are looking to hire their first heads of growth. Love to get some insights into your day-to-day and the hardest parts of your job. How did you prove the value you were delivering to your team? Because it's quite difficult to prove that marketing is a return on investment immediately.
Totally. So I'll talk about it like from like the perspective of very early days.
Yeah.
First, I will say to everyone here, like if you don't have a minimum retention, and I'm not going to be able to come up with a number off the top of my head because it varies by industry, but you can look these up online. Like I would say if you don't have product market fit, you probably don't need a head of growth, because they're going to be trying to like A/B test, and you're not going to be able to reach statistical significance. And more importantly, because you don't quite know yet what is going to work. So you need to have some sort of semblance of like either you have product market fit or you're very like on track for product market fit. So then we're talking about growth from a different perspective, which is like, Gina, come on, like when you start something, you need users. Like, so how do you get those users? That's fair, but it's probably not going to be someone who has like the head of growth kind of experience unless they have worked in the first days of an organization. Remember this also, like it's very different to be head of growth like me, who came in at 3 million users, or someone who already came in at much more versus 0. So you're going to need different profiles. In terms of the profile that I would look for someone who is super scrappy and is not afraid of like testing things out, who has like this, like, I'm going to get my hands wet. Like, I'm not here to delegate, I'm here to do, but also has a really strong inkling for data and caring about like whether things make sense from a data perspective, because otherwise, like you run the risk of spinning in circles. What did you ask again, Ollie? Was it the hardest part of my job?
Yeah. Well, how did you prove the value?
Proving the value. Yeah. Okay. So I proved the value because our whole mandate, like the whole company, really, we were trying to bring in daily active users. So you find like your like core metric, like the North Star or whatever, and like you need to like improve on that, right? And I was doing that. But more specifically, like when we started doing this PR stuff, I was told, listen, you can get us on the cover of the New York Times. I don't care. If you don't get us daily active users, it didn't matter. It's like, we just want daily active users. So from day one, I wasn't the head of growth. I was just like consultant person who was doing some stuff that ended up being PR. And then they sent me around the world to do Duolingo growth without it being called growth, or like all over the world. But what I was doing things that we could very clearly measure as like led to a very serious impact in DAUs. And to do that, you need to have a certain mindset. So for example, like I can't have a story in the New York Times. This is a bad example because the New York Times is too big, but let's just for fun. I get a story out in the New York Times and it's about like how Duolingo raised money from a certain VC. And then it ends up being about like other apps that raise money from this VC, or other things that this VC has done, or top education apps you need to know, and it's on the New York Times. Like that's not going to get people to download Duolingo and use it. What is going to make people download Duolingo and use it and become DAU is a different type of story. And then you have to understand what that is. So for example, like how Duolingo is changing education through data in a way that is actually like, you can actually see data and see how people are learning more than they were before, or a story of a user who was able to get a job or skip a semester in college because they use Duolingo, or like 3 users, and you have those 3 stories. Like that makes people read this and be like, okay, if this person learned, I can learn too. Or I want to be using something that's scientifically proven versus the stuff that's not scientifically proven. Like you have to think of that story. From the growth team perspective, what happened was like I was doing this stuff and just like also like government partnerships. It was like whatever would make Duolingo, like what if we got the government to use Duolingo in all public schools? Wow, that'd be amazing. Turns out governments are super slow and like they don't implement things super well. So then it became a strategy of like, okay, how can we get like Duolingo to have a logo on the government website so that I can then write to journalists and convince them that the government is using Duolingo and therefore they should write a story about the future of education and how Duolingo is a part of it in this country, such that teachers are now convinced that they can trust using, like thinking through those things. But then they were like, growth was starting to become a thing, like 2014 or I think 14, maybe 15. And someone, think of VC, was like, Luis, like founder and CEO, you are the head of growth of this company, because he was the one who knew all the metrics by heart. You can't be the head of growth of this company. Like you need to have an actual person who focuses on this. So they considered hiring. And in the end, they were like, okay, well, this girl's bringing in daily active users. Why don't we just give it to her? I had no idea what I was doing. I had to go home and like Google what is growth and read Andrew Chen's blog. And what we did, so they were like, you have this one engineer, and we just like, it was the ROI, like, okay, what do we think can have the biggest impact with the least amount of work? And then run the experiment and show everyone, look, like this actually improved this metric by this %. And that brings us this many daily active users. Now we did a second one. And so then being like, we really wanted a designer. So showing like, look, we think that if we do this experiment or this experiment, if we're able to improve these metrics by like, let's say 4%, like for us, the threshold was like minimum of 1, but it's because we already had millions of users. If you're early stage, you need like 20% or more, like a certain threshold that was believable. Like we think we can impact this by this %. We can bring this many new users, but we need a designer. Otherwise we can't do it. Okay, here, you can have half of this person. It's time. All right. Then we would like test it out and be like, look, but also to manage expectations, 50% or more of our experiments failed. So that's something that like, just telling everyone out here, whoever's listening, if your experiments are failing, it's okay. It's part of the process.
Yeah, it's part of the startup journey as well. Hey, we don't have that long left, and we have a lot of questions coming in.
Okay.
So why didn't we just pick 3 to 4, 1 minute each, and then we'll have to let you go.
Okay.
What was the hardest market you marketed in?
Easy. China, number 1, India, number 2. Should I elaborate?
Yeah. Why was it hard?
We did most of the stuff we did at Duolingo was like assuming that most countries were very similar. And we kept getting told that they weren't. Like in France, people like this or that, or in this country, like this is what people believe. And we kept being told to change the app, but we knew that it would lead to a lot of tech debt and complexity in terms of rolling out new features and A/B test if we modified things per country and culture. So we didn't. In China and India, we had to eat our words a little bit because it just wasn't the case. Like those 2 countries were anomalies. In India, so first of all, India is a huge country. They were both equally as huge, I think. I don't know, 1.5 billion for the population of each. I was looking at it, and like now India has, I think, 5 million more people. Like it's crazy. They're huge. What also means they're very diverse, and it's not one country. It's like it's one country of like a lot of different countries where people speak different languages, even like a lot of different languages. So for an app where you're trying to serve a population, them speaking the same language helps a ton. So that's number 1. So we're like, fine, we're just going to cater to Hindi speakers. That's number 1 language. They want to learn English. They're probably more affluent. They're probably thinking of English more. I don't know. We had a bunch of assumptions. And if there's anyone Indian here and I'm saying something stupid, I'm really sorry. I'm learning every day. But these were the assumptions. And it turns out that Hindi is hard to type on your phone. So a lot of people had English set as their native UI on their phones, which meant that if they downloaded Duolingo, it automatically assumed they spoke English and did not offer learn English on. So this is one example of like how something we just discovered by going there and talking to people and observing users, which we didn't have to do before. Also, we learned like we couldn't like get people to download an app as easily because people would go to like a local shop and ask them to download apps. So just like behavior was very different. And then also from a monetization standpoint, India is very hard to monetize because people make very little money, like in general. So it's a huge population, but like, by and large, very poor, with exceptions, much like Brazil, where I'm from. China is a whole other thing, because then you have like the BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, like monopolies, and they like own everything. And you need to somehow ally with one of them, but you don't know who, because you don't quite understand how it works. There's also these fears of like the Chinese are trying to copy everything, and they're just going to like, if we partner with them, they'll just do Duolingo on their own and they don't need us. And then like apps look very different there because like they contain a whole world. Like think of WeChat, they have like whole. So we just went there being like, it doesn't matter. It's like 1.5 billion people. Even if we get a small percentage of this population, we will win big, which to be honest, did not turned out to be wrong. It did turn out to be right. And now Duolingo is growing a lot more there, and they have an office there. But one thing that happened that was also tough, and on top of all of this, so we had a meeting with, I think, Tencent or one of those, I forget. We had no idea what the meeting was about. We walked out of the meeting super confused, like that. We don't know what they want to give it to us. It wasn't just a language barrier. I think it was a cultural barrier. I studied Chinese in college. I speak bad Chinese, but I speak Chinese. Not enough probably to have a really like interesting conversation, but enough to like, level a little bit. So that was tough. But something that happened was the first day when we launched, we got 1 million downloads because of our efforts, which was like, oh my God, so successful. And then the government blocked the app and we had no one to talk to. We had nothing to do. We couldn't like do anything about it, but everyone started giving us 0 like stars, like because they would download it, it wouldn't work. So they'd be like, this app sucks. And then we could never like recover from that. So it's like a really bad start and we had to like rethink everything. So that was tough.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Sounds like a doozy.
Yeah. Second question, I think this might be the final one, but a really good one. Referral programs, they're kind of old school. Do they still work? And how would you think about creating one on the basic level?
I will tell you that we tried referral programs at Duolingo and failed every time. So literally you're talking to someone who has no success. But I know why. I have theories as to why, and I have opinions about this. So first of all, yes, referral programs absolutely still work and will continue to work until AI fully takes over. Because humans are very influenced by other humans, and you're much more likely to do something because your friend told you that it's cool than because you saw an ad or because whatever, your mom, people still trust authority figures. So if an authority figure, a teacher, a doctor, an influencer, a journalist says you should do something, you're much more likely to do that. So to me, referral is like getting someone to convince someone else of doing something, and like it works in a lot of different frameworks. One thing that we didn't have at Duolingo when we started was that it was free. So we had no real value to offer. And we knew from studying Uber and Airbnb and those early cases that like really important component of a referral program was that the person who refers gets something and the person who gets the referral also gets something. And normally it's in the format of cash. So you get like monetary like incentive on both sides. And we weren't able to offer that. So I think that was a really important miss. But for example, for Latitude, I didn't tell you guys anything about what I'm doing now, and I know we're out of time, but at Latitude, it's kind of like, in a way, it has Antler components, but it's just focused on Latin America, but we're also building a fintech, and we also have a fund, and it's a little different. But if, early stage entrepreneurs in Latin America, referral is a really important piece of what we're doing, because really smart, accomplished entrepreneurs trust really smart, accomplished entrepreneurs. And so like, that's the most effective way, not just of convincing someone to like discover Latitude, but of bringing the best people who are the most likely people to be exactly the persona we're looking for, because people have people who are similar to them in their surroundings. So I'm a big believer in it, but if you're not getting it right, don't be hard on yourself, because Duolingo got it hard for years, got it wrong for years, and I don't know how they're doing now.
Yeah. You've kind of answered my final question. What are you up to next? So Latitude, what are you up to? And what are you really excited about in terms of trends?
Yeah, so I'm a co-founder and CEO of a company called Latitude. That's why I didn't go to Antler, because I was going to build something else, but then I built this and it was very Latin America focused.
That's okay. We need to collaborate.
Yeah, of course we can collaborate, and we should collaborate. But basically, Latitude was created to make it a lot easier to succeed as an early stage entrepreneur if you are in Latin America, because specifically like in Latin America, things are very hard, and I am Latin American and I really care. And I think we have a huge green field of opportunity of solutions to be built for hundreds of millions of people, access to fintech, access to education, access to whatever, like a bank account or like medical help and a bunch of other stuff. There's a lot of money to be made. But even more founders are going to fail because of our political, financial instabilities and other bureaucratic issues. So we built Latitude. We raised money from Andreessen Horowitz. It was a 13 million seed round. And we built a community education platform, but then also a fund. And then more importantly, a platform to make it easy to launch a new startup in Latin America. So we do incorporations for you. We automated all of that thing, kind of like Stripe Atlas in the US. And we are about to launch bank accounts for startups, for founders in Latin America, because if you create a startup in LATAM, you probably need an offshore in many cases if you want to get investments. And then if you need an offshore, it's really hard to figure out how do you bank that and how do you stay compliant across countries. And if you're a startup founder, you have 50 million things to worry about. And these are like 5 extra super annoying ones that like are taking your attention away from the problem you're solving. So we're there to solve them for you.
Awesome. Hey, this has been incredible. We've had so many messages in the chat here, how grateful they are, how grateful the founders are for your time, and so many interesting insights. So thank you so much. I think like we could go on for hours, but I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much. And for any founders who are listening and who want to connect, how can they connect with you?
Yes, please add me on LinkedIn. It's going to require an email, so you could just do gina@latitude.com. Or whatever, tweet at me. You can find me on Instagram. I'm just Gina on Instagram, which is so special. So you can message me there.
You've got the OG username.
I'm the OG Gina. Yeah, but that's awesome. I really hope this was helpful. The whole goal is just to help early stage entrepreneurs. And I didn't get to see any of the messages in the chat. They don't show up for me. So
they're all positive. Don't
just
worry.
letting you know.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. Really much appreciated. Looking forward to having this episode live, and we'll catch up soon.
Cool. It was my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation and for everyone who stayed through the end.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.